No, I'm just kidding. Last week we started a new series on discipleship. We talked about the need for discipleship and God's plan for discipleship, which is really just that we, as followers of Christ, share with others. That what we've been taught, what we learn in our Christian walk, we share with other people. And this morning we want to begin, we want to look at Luke chapter 14 as our text. And the 14th chapter of Luke is very interesting. It begins with Jesus Christ being invited to a dinner at one of the Pharisees' homes. And it was on the Sabbath day, their holy day. And Jesus Christ begins by healing a man, which the Pharisees took offense to. Because obviously, if a guy's sick and you heal him, that's a very offensive thing, right? I mean, who would do that? But to the Pharisees' mind, that was an act of labor, healing somebody. And the Sabbath day was a day of rest. And so they thought that this was a violation of the law of God. But Jesus said, look, if you had an animal that had fallen into a pit, or you had a sheep that had gotten out, you would go and get him even on the Sabbath day, because this was an emergency situation. Somebody was in a desperate need. And of course, it was really a very little effort for the God of this universe to heal this man, which Jesus did. And then Jesus tells several parables or teachings, all related around the idea of dinner. He said, these Pharisees would come and they would all jostle for the right position. They'd want to be at just the best table, and they'd want to be at the most prominent seat. This past week, or I guess a week ago, I went to the Jefferson County Prayer Breakfast, and they asked local pastors to be hosts of different tables. And so I just emailed with the guy that was running it, and I said, yeah, I'll do that, and let me know. And when I got there were all these round tables in this big banquet hall at this hotel. There's a stage and a podium, and the table that I get to host is the one right in front of the podium. Now, for some people, that might have thrilled their heart, that they were right up front. For me, that's not. I was kind of hoping for the back corner, because I'm a Baptist. Look at our auditorium. I mean, the back rows fill up. I used to joke, I wanted to do something in the auditorium where you could create like a conveyor belt, or just all the chairs would turn around. I'd preach from the back one Sunday. Oh yeah, people would be freaking out. It'd be awesome. But Jesus told a story. He said, look, you ought not to come and seek the most prominent position. Because if someone more prominent than you comes, you know what's going to happen? They're not going to kick you down to the next one. They'll kick you down to the next available one. And that might be way down the line. He said, how much better for you to take a humble seat, and they say, oh no, here, you deserve a place of honor. And then Jesus told another story related to a meal. He said, don't just invite people that can give you status or advantage. Said, but invite people to dinner, to a meal, to a gathering, who can do nothing for you, that you can just give to and be a blessing to. And so you see how these teachings were directed towards the Pharisees, towards these elite. And then Jesus tells a story about a man who threw a great feast. And he invited people, and they made excuses. They said, well, I've just been married, or I just bought a piece of property, or I've got this business deal going on. Excuse me from going. And so finally the man tells his servants, get the halt, get the lame, get the poor, get the beggars, bring them in. And he said, we've done that, and there's still space. And he says, go out into the highways and the hedges and compel people to come in, because I want my house to be full. And so Jesus tells this story about his desire for his house to be full in Luke chapter 14. And then in verse number 25, it says, now great multitudes went with him, and he turned to them and turned and said to them. So he's gone from the Pharisees now, from the Pharisees' house, and all these people are following him. And you can imagine his message is one of love, of acceptance, of God's desire for all to come to him. And so, being a strategic planner and thinker, Jesus would capture that momentum and really rally this gathering together to do great things for God, one might think. But that's not what he did. What Jesus did at this point was to turn to this large crowd and to begin to speak what we want to look at for our text this morning. And he gives really a message that they say from that moment on, people begin to not follow him. Because it was a difficult one to receive. And so he turns and he talks about being a disciple. Great multitudes went with him, and he turned and said to them, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciples. Now, I've been at church in a lot of different services. I've been at testimony meetings. I've never heard anyone stand up and go, this is my life verse. Luke 14:26, if anyone doesn't hate his mother and father and brothers and sisters. Now, growing up as a kid, I mean, there might have been times I wanted to apply that verse. But this is a hard saying. This is a difficult verse. And as we look, Jesus gives several statements here, really negative statements to say, if you want to be my disciple, you can't do this. You've got to do this. Here are some clear characteristics, prices to be paid, conditions to be met if you're going to be my disciple. And he begins with our relationships. He says, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and his mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters. Well, I thought God was a God of love. I thought God would want us to love our brothers and sisters. Doesn't it say that somewhere in the Bible? And so this verse seems out of place. It seems odd. The Greek word there that's translated to hate really means to love less. And I would submit to you that to follow Christ doesn't make you love your wife less, but it does mean that our love for God needs to be our highest priority. Our highest priority. God sets out the priorities here, and he says, it's not your mom and dad, it's not your brothers and sisters, it's not your wife and children, it's not even your own self. But we need to put God, our love for God, above all else. Now, the other thought that comes to mind as I read this and thought about this week is, well, isn't love something we feel in our heart? I mean, how do we control the amount of love that we have? And it is true that love is partially emotional. It's something that we feel in our heart. I mean, there are days I wake up more in love with my wife than other days. I told you she's not here today, so we'll feel free to talk about it. I know, it's like I'm unloose. But it's being recorded too. So I'll have to watch what I say. But we understand that, right? I mean, my wife and I have been married for 23 years. And some days are more, yeah, is that all? Well, we're trying. Some days we're more in love than others. I know, I can just tell. Some days she rolls over, looks at me, and goes, "Oh, really?" I get that. Amen? I mean, I get it. But for the most part, she's in love with me. We love one another. And we can stoke the fires of that love. First of all, we make a choice to love. In the case of God, Jesus said, if you love me, keep my commandments. If we will follow after God, it demonstrates our love, but it will also grow our love. Listen, if I come home late from work and I limit my conversation and my time with my wife, if I don't call her throughout the day or communicate with her, and I make sure that I've got plans separate from her on the weekend, and I just don't pay her a lot of attention, then I can pretty much ensure over time my love for her is going to dwindle. Because I'm not spending time with her. I'm not paying attention to her. I'll tell you what, when I set aside time to spend with her, when I focus my attention on her, when I seek to do something for her, maybe I buy a gift for her, or what, when I stoke those fires of love, I'm going to feel them more. That makes sense. I mean, we understand that. The same thing is true with God. We spend time with him each and every day. We make a choice to make him a priority in our life. Our love for him is going to increase. And Jesus said, if you are going to be my disciple, your love for God must be the highest priority of a relationship that you have. Listen, I love my wife. And earthly speaking, she is my highest priority. I've had different jobs. You know what? She stuck with me through those things. We've lived in different areas of the country. She's moved with me as we've made those transitions. We were married. We didn't have any kids. God has blessed us with children. Someday they're going to be fully grown and out of the house, and she's going to be stuck with me. I mean, we're dedicated to one another till death do us part. She's my highest earthly priority. I mean, I like you and I'll do something for you, but at the end of the day, I'm living with her till I die. Makes sense? I mean, that makes sense, doesn't it? But there is one who we will spend eternity with. And Jesus said, if you're going to be my disciple, your love for God has to be the highest of priorities, so that every other relationship, even to a mother and a father, even to a wife, even your children, is less than your love for God. And so we have to have this type of unrivaled love. And then Jesus said at the end of verse 26, even my own life, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. See, somebody might say, but, I love him or her. Can't I be with him or her? I mean, I love them. But our highest priority has to be our relationship with God, even over ourselves. Today we like to think that we have certain things that we deserve. Don't I deserve to be happy? The Bible doesn't tell us, I hate to break it to you, but the Bible doesn't tell us we deserve to be happy. And I was meditating on that idea because I was putting this message together and I thought, do I want to say that? I mean, that's going to be popular, Maybe we can make that our church slogan. You don't deserve to be happy. That'll bring them in, huh? Some of you are like, I thought it was. No. But the Bible doesn't say that. And Jesus said, here, look, you got to hate yourself. You got to love yourself less and love God more. But don't I deserve to be happy? Don't I deserve fulfillment? Don't I deserve... Listen, the Bible doesn't promise us those things. God wants to give you joy in your life. But I think it's easily illustrated if you think about a parent and a child. Listen, you're not going to benefit your child if you do everything you can just to make him or her happy all of the time. Listen, you know what makes me happy? Cake. I'm a fan. Big, and not like any kind of fruit filling. That's too healthy. If you're going to put any filling in it, I like the layer cake where they put extra frosting in the middle of the cake with a corner piece. But if I eat that for breakfast, lunch, and dinner because it makes me happy, it's not good for me. I remember when I was 8 years old. And I wanted to be involved in some kind of a sport. And so my parents signed me up for Mighty Might football. You know, it's like the youngest that the kids were playing at that time in full pads. And so I remember going, and they bought me the helmet and the shoulder pads and the leg pads. And I was, I was tall and rail thin. Oh, did I look mean in that football uniform, let me tell you. And I went to practice, and here was the thing I realized in retrospect. I didn't know anything about football. I mean, nothing. Like, me and some buddies had thrown a Nerf around in the street, but I didn't really have a concept. I was 8. I didn't know about football. So they did a thing that if you weighed a certain amount, they put a patch on you. You were a patch kid. That meant you couldn't carry the ball. You were too big. Well, I wasn't heavy big, but I was tall, and that made me over the weight, and so I was a patch guy, so I was on the line. So the coach said, all right, we're going to do these drills, and you got to get in here, and you got to hit this guy. And I'm like, well, why? What did he do that I should hit him? I don't want to hit him. And then he hit me, and I thought, well, maybe I will hit him. That didn't feel good. I hated football when I was 8 years old. I hated it. I was taller than the other kids. I was big. And they just thought it was funny to run into me because I wouldn't hit them. I wanted to quit so bad. I went home, I cried to my parents. Yeah, it wasn't that traumatic, but I could build it up, but it really wasn't. I cried a lot. I was 8. I said, man, I don't want to play. My dad said, you're going to play. I played the whole year. And I think about that a lot because I'm glad I played. The flip side is, by the time I was a freshman in high school, I loved football. I was like, you can hit people and nobody's going to say anything. Like, you knock a guy down and he's hurt and that's good. Woo-hoo, we found something here, man. I loved it. But not when I was younger. When I was a little kid, I hated it. But my dad made me play. And I thought, that didn't make me happy. But it did teach me about commitment. And it did teach me about follow through. He didn't make me play the next year, but he made me fulfill my commitment to the team. I said I wanted to play, and I said I wanted to be on the team. And when things got difficult and not the way I wanted them, I wanted to quit, and he wouldn't let me. And I'm glad he didn't. It didn't make me happy. But it did teach me some concepts that I'm glad that I learned. Jesus said, if you want to follow me, it's not even about your own happiness. You can't just love yourself. You've got to love me. If you want to be my disciple, you've got to love me. And then he goes on in verse 27 and says, and whoever does not bear his cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. For which of you intending to build a tower does not sit down first and count the cost, whether he has enough to finish it, lest after he has laid the foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it begin to mock him, saying, this man began to build and was not able to finish. Or what king going out to war against another king does not sit down first and consider whether he is able with 10,000 to meet him who comes against him with 20,000. Or else, while the other is still a great way off, he sends a delegation and asks conditions of peace. Jesus said, If you're going to be my disciple, you've got to take up your cross and follow me. You've got to bear your cross. Now to the Jews, the cross was the ultimate shame. The cross, and it's kind of difficult, I think, to our mind, because to us, a cross, I mean, crosses are used everywhere. I mean, I drive up and down Colfax, and guys use crosses to decorate their motorcycles. We wear it as jewelry. That was not the Jewish, the Jews that Jesus was speaking to at this time. They wouldn't look at that. They wouldn't look at a cross in that way. I was trying to think. I can't really think of another example except for the cross was a form of execution. Nobody has a pair of electric chair earrings. Right? I mean, we don't. You think about every once in a while you'll see a picture on a news story or somewhere else of a table. And the arms will be spread out, and you know that that's what they use for the lethal injection, execution of those who are condemned to die. We don't use that to decorate our walls. That's not something that we find to be a pleasant picture. That's the way the Jews thought of the cross. Not only that, but we only see those as symbols, but most of those people had actually physically laid eyes on somebody who was executed on a cross. They had seen the suffering and the anguish that they would endure. If you remember back to the crucifixion of Christ, they broke the legs of the thieves on both sides of Jesus. They pierced his side to ensure that he was dead because it was the Passover and they needed to get these guys down. But that wasn't always done. Sometimes guys would hang on a cross for days, writhing in agony, just wishing they could die until eventually they would die. The Jews looked at the cross as a despicable thing. And Jesus said, if you're going to be my disciple, you've got to bear your cross. Galatians says that anything that hangs on the tree is shameful. You know, we look at that, we use that phrase today of bearing our cross. You know, I heard of a lady who said, you know, I've just got a bad temper, that's my cross to bear. Somebody said, no, it's the people that live with you, that's their cross to bear. That's not the way Jesus meant that. It's not the incidental difficulties of life. The cross was a thing of shame, of torture, of agony, and ultimately of death. And so Jesus says to them, you've got to bear your cross. You've got to take up your cross. And then he has in the middle of these phrases where he's saying, you've got to love God even more than mother and father and children and wife, and even more than your own self, or you cannot be my disciple. You've got to bear your cross and carry that, or you cannot be my disciple. And before he comes to this last phrase in Luke chapter 14, where he talks about what you've got to do or you can't be his disciple, he has these few verses where he says, you must count the cost. And as I think about this passage today, I wanted to be careful to not make it an emotional appeal. To not just say, listen, following God and being his disciple and being committed to him is the greatest thing you can do, and not have us make an emotional appeal. Because we've all done things on emotion that maybe we regretted later. You ever bought something? You ever saw something and just thought, oh, that's great. That is going to be so, I need that. Then you got it home and thought, right? We've all done that. Hopefully not too big of a purchase, but I mean, we all make emotional decisions. And Jesus said, following me shouldn't be a snap thing. You've got to count the cost. He said, it's like somebody who builds a tower. Well, that's not, you don't wake up on a Saturday and go, you know what I think I'm going to do today? I'm going to build me a tower. No, it's something that requires planning. I mean, if you go to build a building, right, you've got to have drawings and you've got to have blueprints. You've got to pull permits and you got to get bids and you have a process to go through. And you've got to make sure that you can finish the project that you are starting. Jesus said in Luke chapter 6, he gives the example of building on a rock. Jesus said, verse 46, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do the things which I say? And not do the things which I say. Whoever comes to me and hears my sayings and does them. Goodness. I will show you whom he is like. He is like a man building a house. And listen to the description. Who dug deep and laid the foundation on the rock. And when the flood arose, the stream beat vehemently against the house and could not shake it, for it was founded on the rock. But he who heard and did nothing is like a man who built his house on the earth without a foundation, against which the stream beat vehemently, and immediately it fell, and the ruin of that house was great. Listen, if you're going to build something, you got to take account. I mean, I remember when I was living on the East Coast working at a church that was just beginning. We bought some property there, and we were going to build. And I mean, they had to take soil samples and do environmental studies, and we had to produce a study that determined where the water was going to go, if we were going to asphalt the parking lot, and all of these things that we had to do. I remember that the whole project was less than $1 million, about $900,000. We spent a third of that before we laid the first foot. For all the dirt work we had to do and all the studies and the permits. Why? Because if you're going to build, it's not a snap decision. You've got to count the cost. And Jesus said it's like a man building a tower. And then he goes even more and he says it's like a king going to war. And I thought, if you go to build something and you don't build it right, or you don't count the cost and you only get halfway, Jesus said it's an embarrassing situation. People would mock you. But even worse if you're a king going to war. Right? If you miscalculate that, you say, well, I've got 10,000 good soldiers, but 20,000 are coming. You better know whether you can win that battle or not. Because anytime a leader sends an army to war, it is literally a life and death decision, correct? Even in victory, armies have casualties. And so it's not a decision to be taken lightly. But if you're a king and you lose the war, what do they usually do to the losing king? Yeah, it's not a good situation, right? I mean, they kill the king and probably his family. They want to wipe out that kingdom. They want to wipe out that line. They don't go, hey, good effort. Let us set you up in a retirement home. No. It is a life and death decision. And Jesus said, you've got to count the cost. It's not something that we just make a snap decision on. To be a disciple of Jesus, to follow him. And we talked last week about the idea that a disciple is just a follower, a learner, but a learner who is committed to action. One who is learning to put those principles in action. And Jesus said, if you're going to follow me, you've got to count the cost. And so you have to make God your greatest love. You've got to take up your cross and bear it. And then you've got to have unreserved surrender. In Luke 27 and verse 33, Jesus says, So likewise, whoever of you does not forsake all that he has cannot be my disciple. That first condition has to do with our heart's affection. And the second with our life's conduct. But the third has to do with our personal possessions. Jesus said, you've got to forsake all to follow me. That's not a real popular thing either, is it? I mean, he starts out by saying, listen, you've got to hate your mother and father. You've got to love them. You've got to make all your relationships less than your relationship with God. And then he says, you've got to bear a cross. And if that didn't send the crowds away, he said, listen, just forsake everything you have. Everything. If you want to be my disciple. All that we have belongs to him, and we need to forsake it. I'm reminded of the interaction between Jesus and the rich young ruler in Matthew chapter 19, where he comes to him and he talks about how he wants eternal life, and he says, I've kept the commands, and I've done this, and I've done that. And Jesus said, sell all that you have and give it to the poor. In verse 21, Jesus said to him, if you want to be perfect, go, sell what you have, give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven, and come follow me. And Matthew goes on and says that the man went away sorrowful. Why? Because he was rich. Listen, I have things that I like. I mean, I have things that I enjoy. And I don't want to give up. That's why they're my things. My stuff. It's important to me. But it can't be more important than my dedication to Christ. And even as I say that, and even as I preach this message today, I don't want to put that to the test. Why? Because I like my stuff. I like my things. But Jesus said, if you want to be my disciple, you have to forsake all. What is it in your life that you would struggle to give up versus your relationship with God? And that'll let you know where your priorities are. And I don't say that to give you a guilt trip today. Listen, I've thought about that myself this week. What are the things in my life that I go, I'd rather not lose that? I mean, it took a long time to save for this. Or I've built up the opportunity for this. Whatever it is. A possession, an opportunity, a position that we have. Whatever it is. But Jesus said, if you're going to follow me, you've got to forsake all. I'm not telling you this morning to sell everything you have and give it to the church. The Bible doesn't command that. But we do have to understand that everything that we have belongs to God, and we are merely stewards of it. Nothing we have is ours. It's his. And so Jesus said, if you're going to be my disciple, you've got to forsake it all. As I planned out this series, this was the message that I was most fearful, if you will, to preach. Not because I don't enjoy preaching God's word, but because it's not an easy message to preach, and I know it's not an easy message to hear. Listen, if you hear this message this morning and part of it doesn't convict you or affect your heart, one of two things. One, you really don't have any interest in following Christ. Or two, you're not paying attention. Because I think all of us struggle with relationships that we can put above our relationship with God, even good ones. Listen, loving your wife, loving your children, loving your family, having close friendships and relationships, those things are not wrong. But we have to make God our highest priority, our most important relationship. And it can be a struggle. Taking up our cross and following after him sounds spiritual and sounds like something we ought to do until we're given a cross to bear. Until we're put in a situation that's difficult. And I think about people that I know that are struggling with health issues. And I think, that's a difficult cross to bear. And I think about folks who are in financial difficulties, who are in relational turmoil, and I think those are difficult crosses to bear. And it doesn't sound so spiritual or so fun anymore. But Jesus said, if you're going to be my disciple, you've got to bear your cross. And he said, you've got to forsake all. There's nothing that we ought to hold on to above our relationship with God. And so my question to you this morning is to count the cost, to take account and pray about this week. Do you really want to be a disciple of his? Now I can tell you this morning, there's no greater relationship that you could have than to have a relationship with God. And to make him your highest priority, can I tell you, will make all of your other relationships better. And bearing your cross for Christ is so much better than going it alone. He said, come unto me, all you who are weary and heavy laden. My yoke is easy. My burden is light. Compared to walking without him. And why would we hold on to something that we have no ability to keep anyway? But that doesn't mean the decision to follow him is easy. It doesn't mean that being his disciple is always without difficulty. But I want to encourage you today that we need to be a church and we need to be individuals who are about making disciples. And it begins with us being a disciple of his. And Jesus said, if you're going to follow me, you've got to make me my most important relationship. You've got to love me above all others. You've got to bear your cross. And you've got to give up everything you have. These are the conditions of discipleship, of fellowship of Jesus Christ. Not because I said so, because he said so. And so I want to challenge you not to make a snap decision, but to prayerfully count the cost and consider our discipleship of Jesus Christ. Let's pray this morning. Our gracious